Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Roth. I'm the director of Human Rights Watch. And today we are going to look at really the anatomy of a modern human rights investigation. Traditionally, though, in order to understand what happened when you have a human rights crime of some sort, you needed to send somebody there. And that's often difficult. Governments will close borders. It may be too dangerous. You may not know that something happened. You don't know to get there on time. And what we're going to look at today is a relatively new technique for reconstructing what happened using open source material. So one of the genuine architects of this process is Eyal Weizman, who is going to speak to us about his organization, Forensic Architecture, which is really at the cutting edge of this use of open source material to reconstruct a human rights crime and to enable us to hold a perpetrator to account, even if nobody was there from a classic human rights organization to see it at the time. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Eyal.
Thank you, Ken. Today, when conflict is urban, there is an enormous amount of and very different type of evidence that we have access to. Some of them are language, testimonies of people. We can speak to people. They can upload material online. Others are a little bit less traditional, but I think we know now that we feel the enormous amount of images and data that conflict, especially conflict happening in cities, produce. This enable us to create accountability when we are not able to actually reach the ground. But the problem of open source investigation is collecting that material, verifying it, seeing that those videos are genuine and that they are from the area where we think we are, and then synchronizing them in a way that can tell a story. So what you see here behind me is a kind of perhaps less than 5% of the images that forensic architecture collected of a single day of war in Gaza. In the summer of 2014, the Israeli army invaded Gaza. August 1st was the one day of this war where most civilian casualties were sustained. And Amnesty International, the organization that actually commissioned us to do it, was unable to enter. The Israeli government banned their entry into Gaza. So we started collecting and receiving material from many people on the ground, but sometimes the amount of material does not equal clarity. In some images we see tanks firing, in others we see buildings getting hit by shell, we see civilians running, we see bomb clouds, etc. How to compose and to create a narrative from all these, the wealth of this material. The biggest problem is that of metadata. When you collect material from open sources, they come without the metadata, which mainly for our purpose is the space and time in which those images were taken. So we need to find other ways to do it. We need to find what we call physical clocks within those images that would allow us to understand what time they were taken. One of the techniques in which art historians were always trying to establish the time location on images was meteorology, looking at clouds. And here, adapting that technique, we decided to look at bomb clouds, understanding that each one of them has a unique signature in time and space. We are able, therefore, to collect clips from different parts of our archive and to synchronize them by seeing the precise development of each cloud. So I showed you 3, but we are allowed to sync up hundreds of those videos simply by looking at the sky above. But you need an anchor. An anchor could be provided by satellite imagery. There was one satellite imagery of that day of August 1st. It was taken at 11:39 in the morning, and by chance, it captured a bomb cloud just as it was exploding. We spent days looking for precisely that cloud and found it on the ground here and had to verify precisely its dimension and location. When we were content that this is the one, we were able to time that image and then, via triangulation, the rest of the images of the battlefield. So in fact, looking at the development of bomb cloud in the sky allowed us to create a narrative and to create a timeline of that day and to start seeing what is happening to civilians on the ground. I mean, you would see how the timeline actually develops, how those synchronizations would happen. This is done manually, but now we have systems and techniques to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually accelerate our work that always has a human dimension to it. Then we need to verify where those images are. This is a photograph taken from near a hospital in Rafah, and we see a bomb landing very close to it. We know it is there because we can match the image within our model. The model becomes a way of navigation through the space. Looking at the cloud so closely, we start noticing other things. In fact, we start noticing bombs in mid-fall, splits of a second before they hit the ground, and in this particular occasion, killed, according to Amnesty's researchers, 16 civilians. The Amnesty lawyers asked us to see if we could actually tell which bomb it is and who is the manufacturer. We could freeze those in mid-air, build the dimension of the photograph into the model, measure the photograph, put a grid behind them, measure those bombs split of a second before they come, and find out exactly what ammunition was used, and that enables further legal work or corporate accountability work. So forensic architecture is almost like a pathology of a building. And in a sense, it is a kind of skill that had to emerge. Why buildings? Because wars, most conflicts right now, take place in urban areas. And when they do take place in urban areas, buildings are the targets. And when they are the targets, analyzing buildings, analyzing the rubble, allow us to be something like perhaps archaeologists of the present. And of course, architecture is also the medium that allows us to look, synchronize, and locate the images in space. I personally, maybe you hear from my accent, grew up in Israel and was very much involved in around 2000, the year 2000, in activism and human rights work concerned with Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. All those buildings that you see here might look like nice suburbs, but they're actually violation of international treaties and human rights. In fact, these are kind of architectural crimes happening on the drawing board, and analyzing them and analyzing their relation to Palestinian-built fabric became very important in that work. A big part of that research relied on drawing what was at the time the first map of settlements in the occupied territories. These are in blue, marked in blue here on that map. The area in lighter blue are the areas of their expansion, and what you see in lighter brown are the areas left for Palestinian semi-autonomous areas around. You see that the problem is a problem of form, and formal analysis becomes incredibly important here. We're responding at a time to the call of a great Palestinian scholar called Edward Said, who called for counter-cartography. He said cartography is usually the tool of the dominator. It is the tool of the colonists. It's the tool of the imperial powers since the 17th century onwards. Counter-cartography is a way of inverting that cartographic gaze. Somehow, the development of satellite imagery and the social media imagery that I showed you before has made it necessary for us to turn counter-cartography into counter-forensics, use forensic tools really to investigate alleged state crimes and human rights violation. But sometimes we don't have images, or perhaps only a satellite image. This is the Syrian prison of Saydnaya, run by the Assad government. It is one of the most notorious detention centers when different human rights groups confirmed death in custody, executions, and torture are happening there. And we wanted to reconstruct that prison, but there were no images. No reporting organization was allowed in, and there was no journalism inside. We know that memory has a spatial dimension to it. We know that we recollect things when we return to places where they have happened, but sometimes you cannot take survivors back to the scene of the crime. It's simply impossible to do. Also, survivors' memory is a complicated thing. Survivors are usually traumatized, and trauma does strange things to memory. Sometimes blackouts, repetition. It stretches spaces and time in unpredictable way. Together with forensic psychologists, we have developed an entire methodology of interviewing survivors within 3D environments. We would build with them 3D models, and the process would evolve through a feedback loop. The model will be built through what they can describe to us, and the memory would be rebuilt by being placed in those spaces. The problem in Sadnaya was that most prisoners were led blindfolded into the prison. They haven't seen it. We had to work with acoustic engineers, here with Lawrence Abu Hamdan, in order to give our model sound properties, reverberation and echo modeling, and through that we could approximate the spaces, locations, and distances that we later corroborated with the satellite imagery and others. I'm going to show you two short clips and how it works when one models architecturally sometimes very mundane things and a traumatic memory might emerge. Here, the Palestinian architect on our team, Hania Jamal, asks the detainee to model the hatch on his solitary confinement room.
الشراقة اللي نفس الشيء اللي سميناه طاقة، شيء تحت بيسموه شراقة.
بقى على قد ايه عرضها؟
عرضها بقدر.
He tells that the hatch is a bit bigger than his face. He relates the size or dimension of his body with architectural ones. And then she asks what has happened. And apparently the story that he has not told on normal interviews kind of sprang up where he was in this solitary confinement cell and the guard on the other side wanted to punish him, asked him to push his head through that hatch.
قال لي مدرسك. أنا ما فهمت. قال لي مدرسك. قلت له من وين؟ قال لي مدرسك من هون. أنا قلت لحالي اكذب، قلت له ما بيطلع، هو فعلا راسي بالطول ما بيطلع. قلت له ما بيطلع، قال بالعرض، بيعرف حاله انه بالعرض بيطلع راسي. فعملت هيك، ففعليا انا وقت عملت هيك راسي بالعرض مرق بالعرض يعني وقت صار العرض تبع راسي هو الطول الطبيعي. وبعد ما طلعته بالعرض رجع جلس لي اياه بحيث صارت جوزة حلقي على زيق هي هذا الزيق تبع الشراقة بسموه.
And then his head was kicked and stamped upon on the other side. He fainted. But you could see that most traumatic memory needed a very technical, sometimes architectural question to emerge. Then we placed that online in a kind of an interactive environment where people could actually experience some of those testimonies. We managed to reconstruct the architecture of the prison for sound and memory. You could navigate through it, go to the cell and listen to a testimony. It was one of the very much viewed human rights report, and it led Assad to be questioned on it. And this is what he had to say.
The report that you have mentioned, it was a report made by Qatar and financed by Qatar. You don't know the source, you don't know the names of those victims, nothing verified about that report. It was paid by Qatar directly in order to vilify and smear the Syrian government and the Syrian army.
There are a lot of eyewitnesses.
No one knows who are they. You don't have anything clear about that. It's not verified, so no.
If we were indeed offered Qatari money, I don't know, we might have a dilemma, but we were never offered that. And in fact, what is interesting in it is that you see that in human rights work or in counter-forensic work, increasingly, people go look for who is your funder. We are funded by the ERC, a European Research Council grant. We're funded by human rights and technology grants. We're funded sometimes by commissions from our client, such as Human Rights Watch or Amnesty. But indeed, all those donors do not exercise authority over our finds or our methods. But increasingly, we find that people try to use a certain relativism as camouflaged as kind of like healthy skepticism. In a sense, the principle of post-truth is precisely that. There's a kind of a new propaganda around now. Unlike the propaganda of old, is not trying to convince us of this ideology versus the other, but trying indeed to create a perceptual blurring by which we would not know anymore what is true and what is not. And therefore, verification becomes an incredibly important and arduous process. Verification is a process that must take place, not only technologically, but must build a diagram and a relation of institutions and experts, people on the ground that suffer violence, those that film and record it, those that write about it, the human rights organization that are sent to write report about it, university research centers like us that are able to contribute technologically to it, and perhaps the media that could amplify our voice. These are the kind of the network that are absolutely essential for us of maintaining truth at this moment in time when truth becomes such a precious commodity. I wanted to show just a very last sequence here about American involvement, or US involvement rather, in a military base in Cameroon, the Salak military base, where again reports of torture and execution have taken place. The American military said they do not know anything about it. They have no access to those places. And we know that Facebook is spying on us, but it also could be a good resource to counter and look at violations of others. We built a model in order to match the Facebook photographs of an American service personnel who simply forgot to switch off his location manager, and we can see exactly where this person was because we can match it within the model. And we can see that that person has an access right into the military base. We could see American service personnel training Cameroonian soldiers in night vision equipment. And we can see a film that could almost be comical if it would not be so sad, of American military personnel and Cameroonian one playing football with night goggles equipment, bumping into the building where detainees are held and questioned and tortured according to, again, Amnesty here. So these are the places where American service personnel were seen. These are the areas where we know from the photograph where they were. These are the detention cells where people died in custody also, and this is where they are tortured. And I think that these kind of superimposition make our cases strong, and amplify those testimonies of detainees, and allow us to actually present solid cases that open, in that case, a full American AFRICOM investigation. Thank you for listening.
Eyal, I wonder if you could just walk us through the very meticulous process of how do you comb through social media or other open sources to find some of this visual data, and then how much time, how many people are involved in actually doing this type of analysis?
So we have a team now of about 25, and some of the people we employ are open source journalists whose expertise are both in the languages of the social media website would expect to see things. If it's Syria, it would be in Arabic, Palestine in Arabic. If we're talking about violation in Mexico, we've investigated the disappearance of the students in Ayotzinapa, it would be in Spanish. They would need to comb through social media website and look for, try to isolate the time and space of those images without, again, the images themselves having any metadata. So the first part is combing through, collecting, Then we go and we start synchronizing and geolocating.
Physically, or do you use machine learning? I mean, because how do you even start with something like Facebook? You've got a gazillion members there who may or may not have posted. How do you even find something?
So usually you need also connection with people on the ground. So if, let's say it's Gaza, we'll be in touch with people that we know there, and we'll see where people are likely to post things online. We'll ask for pointers, and we'll start getting to those website or YouTube channels or Facebook accounts, etc., Twitter. But that is very labor-intensive process that we now augment through machine learning. But machine learning is very still, we're all very terrified of it. When you try to use it, it's kind of basic. So you can train, and we do build what is called synthetic classifiers for machine vision. So say you want to look for a particular kind of sarin bomb that is being used by the Syrians in Syria, you don't have enough images of it to train a classifier. So what we do, we build it in 3D, we render it realistically, we teach the algorithm to actually go fetch it, and then we send the algorithm onto the internet, and it will come back with all sorts of things, with Coca-Cola cans, and so then you need to, again, you need the human labor to go through that and sieve through that and verify.
And for an investigation and then analysis of, maybe you choose one of the, I don't know if you all have seen this, but an extraordinary investigation that Forensic Architecture did with the New York Times, published about a month ago or so, is of this young Palestinian medic, a very pretty young woman who was killed during the Gaza border protests. And you completely reconstructed how she was killed. I mean, without anybody having been there. Just collecting visuals from people who were. How long did something like that take? And what is the people power that goes into it?
So this took us a good 3 months of analysis. But the problem with, usually, when we are called to work, is when the videos that are there are not a classic trophy video, when you have perpetrator and victim in the same frame. If that exists, that would go independently on.
That's easy, yeah.
Now, what happened with Rosanna Nazar is that there were many videos there. There were dozens and dozens of videos, but none of them actually caught what happened. So we needed to start building the relation between what happened just before, what happened just after, how we trace some people walking from one side to the other. There was great irregularity in that case, in that the bullet actually skimmed off the ground. We did not understand for many weeks how we could find, because the same bullet hit 3 people, how it could hit people before it hit her lower than where she was hit at the chest, somebody was hit in the leg. So there's a lot of process, a lot of trial and error, a lot of relation with scientists, ballistic experts. I think the key is like collaborations and human rights groups, journalists, open source investigators, modelers like us, ballistic experts, medical doctors. Together we kind of like start building that picture. But the time that it takes is incredible, and you cannot do the similar level of investigation to each case. We need to be strategic, and we need to choose those cases that we think would make most human rights impact. Cases that it is better to do one case well than to cover for us, to go horizontally and to try to do many more cases.
Okay. Would anybody in the audience care to ask a question? Yes, over here. Right ahead. Hang on, we have a microphone coming. Yes.
Thank you for sharing this. Is really insightful. I have one basic question, but I'm more familiar with the work of Bellingcat. Mm-hmm. Is it similar what you do, or how is it different? And secondly, can you also give a bit of context in terms of, can your material be used in courts, for example, to prosecute human rights violators? Where are you bringing this beyond the public for awareness and for, confronting Assad, which I thought was a good use, but can you expand a bit on what else is done with your work?
So Bellingcat is a close collaborator. We've done many projects together with them. Usually they would do the open source, although we do it ourselves, but when we collaborate, they would do the open source analysis. We would actually start understanding the spaces and analyzing very carefully what it is that we see and how to sync those things in space. We would build always 3D models because the 3D model is a way, it's like our optical device. It is the only way to move and understand the spatial relation between those things that we see. Forensic architecture is now one of the advisors, technology advisors to the International Criminal Court, where we're trying to make that kind of evidence applicable. Some of it is applicable. We have presented in the Inter-American Court, we've presented in the European Courts for Human Rights, we presented in national, we presented in Israel in various occasions, more or less successfully. We are able to establish our authority and expertise, but it was always a battle because perhaps for good reasons, courts are rather conservative and they need to see that a certain technology has been around for a certain amount of time before they would accept it. But it's absolutely, for us, essential that each case does two things. It sheds clarity, helps the accountability, but also opens up a little further the door of what could be considered evidence. And without doing the other work, without doing the convincing, without showing that we can work responsibly and meticulously, that we can make that things matter also in a court of law, I think that only half our work is done. And by the way, the minute that a court would accept it, it actually starts influencing back to work that we would never submit to court, because somehow it is a certain stamp of approval that allows our work to be more, to feel more grounded to the people that are viewing it.
Back here.
So how robust are you to fabricated evidence? I mean, I'm working to fabricated evidence, yeah. Right? I mean, I work in computer science, and a lot of evidence can be fabricated in many ways, you know. And so how robust are your processes to that? And is this now a major concern, or is it currently not such a big issue? Or yeah, can you comment on that?
It's absolutely a major concern, but for us, so there's a kind of a vertical and horizontal way of authentication. Vertical for us, it's simply drilling into the image, see if we can detect fault play within this pixel arrangement, if we could see that Photoshop or any other software has been used in it. The horizontal one is much more useful. We are able to convince ourselves that a piece of evidence is genuine if it locks in with others. The problem right now is not scarcity of evidence, it's sometimes overabundance. So the network is what supports a piece of evidence. If it sits well with other sources that come from other photographers, other testimonies, even not by the same, sometimes images are being posted by belligerents in conflict. When we are able to lock them in, we are convincing ourselves that we have arrived at publishable material. That is, for us, the best way to confront manipulation, foul play.
Okay. I see we're running low on time here, but I think what we've seen today is really, the future of human rights investigation. And, the perpetrators are getting more sophisticated in terms of trying to keep us out. And what Eyal has shown us is that there really are ways to reconstruct what happened, even if you're not there. Now, there are new challenges. I think that the disinformation challenge is a huge one, because as this method of investigation gains credibility and gains usage, people are going to try to trip it up and slip in false things. But that's, from the start, is part of the methodology to check that out. And satellite imagery is a very good way of verifying that, because it's harder to manufacture satellite imagery. We know where that comes from. That's a sort of solid source. But I think I would just like to thank Eyal for joining us today, but also for the extraordinary innovation that he has brought to the human rights cause.
Thank you.